Starfield can be a buggy, lagging mess, but it doesn't have to be. The modding community usually ends up covering for Bethesda's shortcomings, which is exactly why today we're going to go over the best Starfield mods that'll give you better performance, visuals, and overall quality of life while you're playing. We also want to test this on hardware reflective of what most PC gamers will be using, so almost everything we're covering today has been tested on an RTX 3060 and a Ryzen 5 7600 at 1080p, which, by the way, is part of a build that Cooler Master helped us out with, featuring their V850 Gold Eye fully modular power supply and a Hyper 212 CPU cooler in Halo White, all built in their beautiful white Masterbox TD500 Mesh V2 chassis. We call it the Orange PC, not because the case is orange, but because of the B650 Live mixer motherboard paired with this really interesting Demon Slayer themed 3060 we picked up for it. So thanks so much to Cooler Master for providing the parts for this build, but this way, with the regular system specs, we can actually address performance issues on a popular graphics card that a lot of you are probably dealing with yourselves. Right out of the gate with Starfield, what we saw is that the game needs work in its overall visual style, optimization, user interface, and just an overall lack of certain settings that need to be fixed. And since performance is vital to a decent gameplay experience, it feels appropriate to start there. AMD is the exclusive PC partner for Starfield, so their FSR2 technology is the only upscaler available to you. Bethesda has recently come out and said that DLSS is going to be added to the game at some indeterminate date, so this video still stands until that happens, and we also don't know the extent of DLSS implementation until it does get formally announced by Bethesda. But upscalers work by decreasing the resolution that your game is being rendered at, and then algorithmically with magic reconstruct it at a higher res image, which can make the game look really blurry sometimes, especially if you're using one that struggles to deal with moving images. Starfield FSR2 Bridge is a mod that replaces the FSR2 upscaler in the game with either NVIDIA DLSS or Intel XeSS. And this could be a big deal if you have an RTX graphics card, because DLSS can introduce you to a more stable image and higher quality particle effects and shadows. You might even notice a small FPS boost in some of the game's more demanding moments, or if you just want to go for the Team Blue alternative, XeSS can offer better image quality, but it hasn't been as thoroughly tested to make sure it's better than FSR2. But this mod works a little differently than your usual DLSS integration. You have to manually adjust your render resolution rather than setting it to performance or quality mode like most game integrations. A lot of people like to combine this with a reed shade filter called adaptive sharpening that you can get by downloading and installing the reed shade app in your game's local directory. This, along with the sharpening slider in your game settings, can help offset the blurriness of upscaling, especially if your render resolution is set particularly low. You can also pair the FSR2 Bridge mod with Starfield performance optimizations, and thank goodness, because no matter how many times Todd Howard insists that this game is optimized on live television, nobody believes him. All kinds of players are having to compromise their game's visuals to get a higher and steady frame rate on this one because it's just overall too demanding on most of our CPUs and GPUs. The name Starfield Performance Optimizations pretty much just speaks for itself here. It's just a custom INI, which is a text-based configuration file that tells your game what to do. But what's really interesting is that there's several versions of different graphical presets. We stuck mostly with the medium preset, which replaces your default preset settings and can deliver around a 10% GPU and around 5 to 10% CPU performance increase while sacrificing as little as possible in terms of visuals and giving you a nice FPS boost. There's also an ultra optimized version for higher end systems that might have a CPU bottleneck, and a potato mode for low end machines. This cranks down every graphical setting, from the shadow resolutions to the grass fade distance to the maximum number of models that can appear in a crowd. It prioritizes performance above all else. It might have a funny name, but if you want to play the game on the minimum required hardware at 60 FPS, then this is the mod for you. And now that your game's running at a higher frame rate, you'll probably notice how choppy the UI looks in comparison. That's because the UI elements in Starfield are, by default, capped at 30 frames, which is pretty noticeable when the rest of the game runs at 60 to 120. But that's where 120 FPS Smooth UI mod comes into play. This mod alters every UI element in the game to have a cap of 120 FPS, which makes the interface more responsive and as a result smoother to navigate the game's menus and just move around your cursor. But just in case case 120 is a little too demanding for your PC, there's also a 60 FPS version for download in the files section on its Nexus Mods page. But now that we did Bethesda's job in making the game optimized, it's time to make it look a little better. We're recording this video at a time before any crazy texture overhauls have come out, but I have no doubt that they will be here at some point in the near future. There's also custom reed shade packs people are using for the game, and a few mods that remove the omnipresent weird blue haze of Starfield, but all of that really comes down to personal visual preference. I personally found that the game looks best when the film grain is turned down because for some reason it's set to 1950s news broadcast by default. Other than that, this in-game FOV Changer mod is an absolute must, again, until Starfield follows up on its patch notes and actually implements changeable FOV. It's coming at a date TBD. But like the name suggests, it'll let you adjust your first and third person field of view independently from one another while you're in the game. This is done through the command prompt console, which isn't a mod, just a feature in the base game you can access by pressing the tilde key. After you install the mod, all you have to do is access it in-game and type .fpp, whatever FOV value you want, to change the first person FOV, and then replace FPP with TPP to adjust the third person. And while you're in there, you can also use it to give yourself a higher level, summon items to your inventory, give yourself money, and just cheat in general if that's your thing. The command line console allows you to do a whole lot, but this mod is only for the FOV. But having a higher FOV in a game like Starfield is useful because you feel way less cramped, but it also super exaggerates the dreaded Bethesda stare when you enter a dialogue scene with an NPC. You know the one I'm talking about. Like in Oblivion, when you talk to somebody, the camera shoots in on the other person's face and they look directly into your soul. So to keep the camera from going crazy, we'll use the Match Dialogue Camera with Character FOV mod. With this, we can keep our FOV the same as it is in normal traversal while we're in dialogue. It's a little weird because you still have to set the FOV value manually in your game's custom INI file, which this time is a little different than the graphical preset files we talked about earlier. The mod's installation instructions explain everything, but all you have to know is that you can customize the dialogue FOV value to be anything you want. It can even be different from your normal camera if you want. So in theory, you could set your normal camera's FOV to something really high and the dialogue FOV super low to get an extreme version of the Bethesda stare. I don't know why you want to do that, but hey, who doesn't like options? So far, we fixed Starfield's upscaling shortcomings, optimized the graphics and UI for higher frame rate, and fixed the lack of an FOV slider. Some might say that's enough to fix the game, but I disagree. Let's shift our focus now to the quality of life improvements that modding can bring to Starfield, starting with Cleanfield, a no intro videos and clean menu fix. This mod bypasses the intro video, splash page, daily message, and even Starfield logo if you want from the beginning of the game. It allows you to take the minimum time possible from clicking launch to loading your save file. This is honestly fantastic for testing a bunch of mods like I've been doing because it'll save you a few seconds every time you launch the game. And trust me, those seconds add up after you launch Starfield like 400 times over and over again to make sure you didn't break everything. It also doesn't disable the daily message or the Starfield logo on the main menu by default, but you can bypass it manually through a custom INI file later. Those won't save you any extra boot time though, so they're pretty harmless to leave in. Next up is probably my favorite mod of the bunch, StarUI Inventory. This one makes the inventory system more intuitive by introducing a few simple changes. The default inventory system gives you minimal information and forces you to tab in and out of different subsections of items, but StarUI provides you with more details and sorting options for your items, along with icons on the left side of the screen that correspond to your different item categories. It's also fully customizable, but by default introduces a cool value to mass ratio sorting option that lets you sort by whatever is heaviest and most profitable first, which makes the process of figuring out what to sell when you're visiting shops way easier. Oh, and it also makes it so that when you hit tab to exit your inventory display, you bypass the main menu screen and skip right back to gameplay, which is probably where you're headed from that point anyway. Another great mod to check out is Enhanced Player Health Bar. This one changes the color of the quartered increments of your health bar so that it's more obvious when you're accumulating damage. Since the stock health bar is just a white block that shrinks when you get hurt, it's sometimes hard to notice when you're getting too close to dying in the game. But by using this mod, you can make the bar cycle from either white to yellow to orange to red, or forego the white entirely and go from blue to yellow to orange to red. And going along with little meaningful fixes, our next mod is called Menu QOL, which simply put, grays out your completed missions. This seems like something small, but I promise you, you won't want to go back if you try it. Especially at the beginning of the game, it's confusing to see quests at the bottom of the screen that aren't completable. That's because there's a little line on your missions page that signifies the end of completable missions, with your already completed ones sitting below that. But the game doesn't explicitly tell you this unless you click on one of those quests to see check marks besides all of the steps. But this mod clearly defines which missions are already over and done with. Undelayed Menus is a mod that's arguably the most minor change out of anything else on the list, but dang it, I think it's still a nice addition still. This mod makes it so opening your menu in Starfield is a little less animated and a little more snappy. It doesn't seem huge, but you'll be opening your inventory a lot in Starfield, and any reduced clunkiness in doing so is much appreciated. Next up is item sorting tags, another one of my personal favorites from this video, even if it is, again, a small but mighty change. It adds these cute little descriptor icons besides items in the world and your inventory to give you an idea of what you're about to loot or get rid of at a glance. This mod really shines when combined with the StarUI and Undelayed Menus, and lucky for you, I already told you about both of those. Finally, I want to talk to you about BetterHUD, which is kind of a broad one. This mod has several versions on its Nexus Mods page, all aimed at different levels of immersion. You can use it to eliminate certain pop-ups, health bars, and more, but the one I'm using specifically adjusts where the pop-up happens on screen whenever you either gain XP or enter a new area. So instead of being dead center now, they're just lowered a little bit, which makes them way less intrusive to my gameplay because they're not distracting me from what's actually happening. Now, if you're on a 40 series card, I think it's worth bringing up the Starfield frame generation replacing FSR2 with DLSS G mod. This thing exists and works super similarly to the FSR2 Bridge mod we discussed earlier. The really cool part though is that it supports not just DLSS G or frame generation, I guess we're calling it DLSS G now, but also just normal DLSS. So this can act as a one-size-fits-all solution for RTX cards. If you do have a system that lets you take advantage of frame generation though, this adds what we call extra AI-generated phantom frames that improves visual fluidity, potentially at the expense of some added input latency. We tested out this mod on an RTX 4060 and the results are really good. Even at full render resolution, the game feels smoother on optimized medium settings with DLSS G frame generation on. And now a few silly little honorable mentions that I think everybody should look into are the PlayStation Intro Splash mod, which is hilarious and replaces the Bethesda intro with the PlayStation Studios one, and all the weird iterations of the flashlight mod. These include, but are not limited to, Ryan Gosling from Blade Runner, Giga Chad meme, Todd Howard, this emoji, bat signal, Nicolas Cage, Bill Clinton, and of course, the PlayStation logo. Also, if you're watching this video as some kind of tutorial, here's some advice on incorporating these mods. First of all, use a mod loader. I'm using Vortex, the one you can download straight from Nexus Mods. And once you figure out how to use it properly, it actually works really well. And you won't have to reinstall the game a bunch of times if and when things break. And if you're planning on using Vortex, I'd highly recommend watching Gopher's Vortex, a beginner's guide playlist on YouTube. It's a 5-year-old video, but even just watching the first few of them can get you a good enough understanding to tackle the majority of problems that modding can throw at you. Also, make sure your mods are downloading and installing on the same drive as your game, which is an easy way to unintentionally break everything. You can thank me later for that. But those were our favorite Starfield mods that give you better performance, visuals, and overall quality of life while you're playing. Did we miss something that you think should have been here? Did we help you fix a problem you're having? Or did you just enjoy the video? Make sure to tell us in the comments or join us over on Twitch or Discord to continue the conversation about your favorite Starfield mods.